911, what are you reporting?
I got a strange going on out here. Something just killed my dog.
Something killed your dog?
My dog went flying through the air over the tree. I don't know how it did it.
Okay.
Damn it, I'm really confused. All I saw was my dog coming over the fence, and he was dead when she hit the ground. I didn't see any cars. All I saw was my dog coming over the fence.
911, what are you reporting?
We got someone or something crawling around out here.
Did you see what it was?
It was standing up. I'm out here looking through the window now and I don't see anything. I don't want to go outside. Jesus Christ, you better...
Sure.
Dia!
Hello?
Get somebody out here.
What's going on now, sir?
That son of a bitch is about 6'9", I don't know.
Do you see him now, sir?
Yes, I'm looking right at him.
Uh-oh.
And we are live. Daniel, what's going on, man?
I'm very, very well, mate. You?
I am hanging in like a hair in a biscuit. Excited about today's show. I'm glad to be live with you on a random Thursday morning at a little after 11 o'clock Eastern time. So I don't know how many people will have piling in. A lot of people will be at work and will watch this afterwards and obviously hear it on the audio versions of the Sasquatch Odyssey podcast, as well as the Mythical Legends podcast, because we are broadcasting in all kinds of places. What's been going on with you, man? What you're up to today?
I'm up to kind of doing all sorts of conference things and podcast planning for the next few days. And yeah, what about you?
Same thing, man. Always doing stuff, always doing the getting content ready for dropping tomorrow. We've got 3 shows dropping tomorrow, as always, on Friday. So lots of that stuff. But we're here for other things today. We're actually here. There's our other host that just popped in. Chris, what's going on, man?
Struggling with technology, Brian. Struggling, but we're there now.
We all struggle together, my friend. We are glad to have you here from the UK. We have an amazing guest on the show. I'm going to go ahead and bring him on so we can get started. This is why everybody's here. They're not here to hear us pontificate about Bigfoot. They're here to hear Tobe Johnson. Welcome to the show, man. We got you unmuted now. Now you can talk to the people.
Can you hear me now?
Can you hear me now? Yes, we got you, man. Welcome to the show.
Thanks. Good morning.
It is good to have you here. Thanks for the patience with the late start, but we're going to get right into it. We're going to talk about all things Bigfoot. We're going to go down some roads today. There's no telling what kind of rabbit holes we'll end up going into today, but I'm going to throw it to Daniel and give him the opportunity to ask you the first question, and let's get into this, man.
All right. So going all the way back to the beginning then, could you tell us about when, what was the inspiration to the cryptozoology and Bigfoot world for you?
Well, Daniel, it started probably with the show Close Encounters of the Third Kind, which tells the story of a witness obsessed by an experience, a hidden event that he had happen. And that impression was left in me probably around the age of 5 or 6 years old. However, it stuck with me as kind of a documentary more so than a Spielberg sci-fi thriller. And that was really, sitting in the back of my mind when around 2005 timeframe, I found some footprints with my son. And I was having a similar experience as the Richard Dreyfuss character as far as like, what if, this could go down a rabbit hole worth having with father and son. It turns out that father took to it a lot more than son. And so here we are, 2024, still looking down all these rabbit holes of Bigfoot.
Wow, that is an excellent story there. And say, I know that my dad loves kind of Spielberg and say he's into Jaws and all that kind of stuff.
Oh,
but
yeah.
Amazing kind of. So I'll pass to Brian now.
So you found these tracks, you were interested in the subject. When did you really start digging into the Bigfoot phenomenon, getting out into the woods, taking a look at this, and really diving into that rabbit hole that we've all went down of Bigfoot and that phenomenon?
Well, it turns out that a neighbor of mine was a witness, and he was saying incredible stuff. He was saying stuff that he was experiencing the phenomena multiple times. And to me, that seemed like an error or a fallacy or just somewhat extreme. However, I kept hearing that from witnesses as I started to interview them. I would do monthly meetings, kind of like Alcohol Anonymous meetings up in the woods at an old pizza parlor once a month on a Wednesday night. And we'd pack the house full of blue collar workers, cops, forestry workers. And we'd all tip back an IPA, have some pizza, and tell outrageous Bigfoot stories. That turned into conferences. And by the time 2010 rolled around, I really just had to make a choice as to how I wanted to spend my time Bigfooting. Did I want to merely go with the flesh and blood answers, or did I want to lean into this idea? By the way, what the First Nations people say is that these are a type of people, and you can experience them on multiple occasions if you do it the right way. And there seems to be a right way and a wrong way, in my opinion, on how to experience this phenomenon.
I definitely want to get into some of that stuff as far as those experiences, because I have seen that so much in my Bigfoot research is the different experiences people have depending on how you look at this phenomenon. So I definitely want to get into some of that. Before we get into any more of that stuff, Chris, did you have a question that you want to throw in at Tobe before we go down another path here?
Yeah, I'm really interested in the footprints you found with your son. How many? How big were they? Yeah.
Right. Well, the footprint was a solo footprint in the icy mud on a hiking trail, but it was headed into the blackberry brush, and it was an either or. It was either a hoax situation or a big man, something to that effect. But we had the mind to put a scale object, in this case, a little hiking whistle, and a survivalist whistle, and took a photo. And when we shopped that photo around, it got a conversation going with a local friend of mine. And he introduced me to the world of Bigfoot and how to talk to these men and women. And I guess I really took to the interview process. I started walking around wherever I could with a recorder, inviting people out to community colleges. It was just a matter of time before I would get out in the woods and experience this myself, which really took no time at all. I lived in the little town of Springfield, Oregon, a lumber town. And so for me to drive into what people would call pristine Sasquatch habitat was literally like a 20-minute drive in my trout fishing days on the McKenzie River. It was Sasquatch's backyard or front yard.
Cool.
Let's talk a little bit about, let's stay in the vein of footprint evidence, because that's something that has happened to me recently. I cast some prints here on our land last October, and they turned out really well. I sent them over. I was able to replicate them finally, and I sent them over to Cliff, and Cliff's looking at them, and I know he sent some scans a couple of days ago, and he sent them over to Meldrum, and he's waiting to hear back from Dr. Meldrum. Well, let's talk a little bit about some of the other footprints that are out there. I know you were involved in the 2012 back in the London Trackway days.
Mm-hmm.
I've talked to Cliff at length about that. But for folks that aren't familiar with those tracks, can you talk a little bit about the London Trackway, how you got involved in that, and what ended up being the case with those particular tracks?
Well, it's funny you mentioned that. Cliff and I had a conference in Oak Ridge, Oregon, a couple of months back, and these supposedly dubious track finds of 120 footprints in the February mud of Cottage Grove lake bed were, in a roundabout way, found by my son through a neighbor named Max Roy. Long story short is, a guy was on a walk on a trail bed, saw some interesting footprints, saw a bumper sticker on my son's car, and knocked on the door and said, "Hey, there might be something interesting down the road. You should go take a look." And then I got the call. I was working hospice care at the time in Eugene, Oregon. And by 11 o'clock at night, we were learning how to cast prints. Initially, these were 3 prints off of the kind of a unestablished trout fishing spot above a lake bed. We ended up finding a fourth print coming in from the Poison Oak Trail between a Warehouser Road and what is known as London Road. Hence, the name of the trackway was the London Trackway. And so for a period of months, including, footprints, we had a guy come down from Hood River and do one of the first drone studies of the trackway as far as weight displacement measurement. There's all sorts of what I would call field research science going on as far as what these tracks could be. One thing was interesting is that the tracks seemed to be legit just due to the fact that they were so big, so expansive, and there was 10 seasoned researchers, including Cliff down there. We all walked away with different evidence of what was going on with these footprints, some 14.5 inches in length and some 45 inches apart for over 100 yards. There's interesting attributes about these footprints that I think point to an elaborate hoax, if this is the case, not just a simple rigid stomper at all. But now with the use of having LiDAR on our phone, the evidence that we didn't walk away with, unfortunately, in that lake bed could have been repeated again. Since that time, new tracks have been found in and around the London area as well by a team out of Eastern Oregon. And they're very similar to the tracks that we found in 2012. Now, this would have been last year, I believe, sometime. So it makes me wonder what's really going on with that trackway. The point is that it led me to Cottage Grove. This was already a hot spot. We all knew the area was ripe with Bigfoot encounters. That's why we, some of us still think they're real. And no one's ever come forward with proof that these are fake, except an opinion about it. There is no stomper. There is no, person that has the smoking gun.
Wow. So kind of moving topics then, Tobe. Now, me and you met kind of a couple of days ago, didn't we? And I first knew you from the brilliant show you were on called Expedition Bigfoot. So, could you tell us what your experience was like on Expedition Bigfoot, and what was it like working with the Expedition Bigfoot team?
First of all, when you say it's a brilliant show, it sounds even more brilliant than when I say it. So that's all due to your charming accent. So I got a phone call from the production team that does a couple different shows on Discovery Network, and had a conversation with the owners of those companies about the possibility of just interviewing to see if I wanted to do it. And I said, of course, yeah. I mean, it's a great opportunity to talk about the subject matter, how you want to use me, because I have a weird take on what's going on. Well, not so weird anymore. It used to be kind of weird. Now it's getting more mainstream. But in short, I think that Sasquatch is some kind of land spirit, more so than just a flesh and blood phenomenon. But I'm leaning again on what the First Nations people told me all those years ago. However, since I lean so hard on the fact that we don't seem to have permission to use cameras with Sasquatch, I've been using audio recordings. Mainly, I use my Tascam DR05, the $99 version here that you can get on Amazon. And I walked away with evidence that you seem to be able to get closer to the Sasquatch phenomena if A, you don't try to trick them, B, you tell them what you're going to do, and then only focus in on interaction through audio. They seem to come closer. They seem to leave more than trace evidence. They leave forensic evidence, including hairs. I mean, can't really make this up in here. This hair has been sent off to a gal named Cindy Dosen in Canada, who did a weight displacement, actually did a forensic hair analysis on some of the hairs that we found at this place we call the Al Moon Lab, regarding some knee impressions that we found in the area as well, which are inexplicable. So, but they wanted to focus mainly in on why I thought audio was the key. So we came up with the name bioacoustic researcher or something to that effect. And I'm leaning mainly on the research of Scott Nelson and a voice up here in Dave Ellis in Whidbey Island, a friend of mine up north. So using Audacity as my way of sound analysis, looking at the spectrogram as far as where these sounds land in the hertz level. And so that's what we decided to do, is we would make use of my opinion on how to look at the sounds.
Let's talk a little bit about that. You mentioned the Owl Moon Lab. You wrote a book about this. It's available. We'll certainly talk about the book later on. I want to plug that. I'm also a fellow author on Hanger One Publishing. So we definitely want to talk about the Owl Moon Lab. Let's talk a little bit about that story. How did you get involved in that property? Can you give everybody the overview of what was going on there and how you got involved, and then what you ultimately uncovered during your investigation there?
Absolutely. After the London tracks, it was kind of an established anniversary date of February 2012. So every February, we'd go down to the lake bed and tromps around and look for new prints, perhaps, because that's when the lake was at its driest. It kind of turns into a giant muddy creek and then fills into a man-made reservoir. So someone moved to town that I hadn't met before in and around the lake bed, a guy by the name of Daryl Adams. He was at a private gathering called Beachfoot. This was an annual event put together by Todd Neese. And Ron Moorhead was a regular attendee at that time. So Daryl and Ron had a talk about, where he'd moved. And he said, "Oh, you moved to Cottage Grove. I know a guy that lives up that way. Maybe if you want to look into Sasquatch, now that you're retired, give him a call." And so I got an email or Facebook message, and Daryl and I had a conversation about the London tracks. And so we agreed to meet up there in February, and we hit it off. He had a great sense of humor. That's key to me. Like, I don't want to do this unless you're cool, or unless we're kind of like having jives, I could have a beer with you kind of deal. Because really, that's all you do when you go Bigfooting, is you look for someone that you can hang with, because you're going to hang way more than you're going to have the chills and thrills of Bigfoot. And we just had a lot of fun. And it turned out that he lived near one of the hotspot zones not too far away. And I told him that. And I said, "Hey, you may want to get a better truck. I think you need to get up in those hills. And I'd love to come with you. There's all sorts of stories from behind your house." And so that's when things really took off. And we found these knee impressions off the side of the road while we were elk hunting. And these knee impressions turned into quite a thing, right? Because they're either a single knee impression that is divoted into the mud once, or they are a pair. We don't know which, because the anatomy is not really there on the left-hand print. But it's plus or minus 1,400 pounds with inexplicable hair not in the data set. So nothing matched microscopically the hair as it relates to that. We actually cast the entire print. It was about a 50-pound bag of plaster that we had to make a spontaneous rigid board, bush board, and bring back to the house and let dry for a couple of weeks, not to a month, at Daryl's new house. Now, when we left those impressions in the house, it seemed to bring things out of the woods, other things that would seem to come to Daryl's house, including these weird sounds. And these sounds started off as, and here we're going to get started with the whole sound phenomena, right? I was working as a truck driver now at this time. And so I would go away short haul from Oregon to Washington and get these texts at dark 30 from Daryl saying something hit the house, weird sounds at the house, near the knee impressions, yada, yada, yada. That's when we started setting the recorders out. So he would put a parabolic and I would put my Tascam. He said, "Well, why don't you just move in and study this?" Sorry, my dog's on camera here. "Why don't you move in and study this thing full time with me?" I said, "Okay." So I brought my camper in and I moved in with Daryl. And what we noticed is that these sounds were way more mysterious than possible house slapping or rock throwing, because there was a predicated sound of something hitting, but there was no secondary sound of a rock falling down on the ground. There was just these weird thuds all around his house. And I thought, wow, that's an incredible thing to try to document visually. Let's stay up all night and see if we can do that.
Yeah, it's definitely an interesting story. Daniel, I'm going to go over to Chris and let Chris get a question in here.
Yeah, I'm a little bit in awe by that story. That's quite remarkable. But tell me about the sound recordings. Have you found the infrasound? Have you found evidence of that?
Well, in and around Cottage Grove is one of the only places where we most likely experienced what people call infrasound. I don't think it's infrasound at all. I think it's kind of like some kind of psychic force entering the forest because it pinpoints to individuals. It's a little bit lengthy of a story, but yeah, we were kind of pushed off as a group after 2012 time frame. I get the dates mixed up a little bit, but there were about 5 of us in and around Daryl's neighborhood, let's say, where we were actually pushed out of the woods. In one case, one of the guy worked for the local fire department, and this guy was so scared that he ran down the hill saying, "Why am I going to cry? Why am I going to cry?" That did not fit the profile for his job at all. Although I didn't know the guy that well, I thought maybe he was a box of crazy. Who the hell knows? But one by one, these grown men are running out of the woods saying crazy stuff like, "I shouldn't have brought my gun. I got to throw my gun away." It's just it's something beyond infrasound. They're getting messages delivered to them as individuals, and it's focused and targeted like one of those riot LRAD machines that the cops use to disperse individuals. Same principle.
It's interesting because I interviewed Abe out in Minnesota a couple of months ago. And Abe felt like he had been in a situation where he was in a group and he was the largest person in this group. And he felt like he was targeted with infrasound because he became nauseous. He was having trouble going any further into the area, but he was the only person feeling these effects. And then once he backed out, the infrasound or whatever was going on seemed to dissipate and stop. But again, nobody else was targeted in that scenario. Have you heard of anything similar to that? Obviously, these guys are getting messages, as you said, that were targeted, but have you heard of other scenarios where people were having negative experiences and they felt like they were being targeted with infrasound?
Yeah, of course. I mean, you hear the stories. It's just confirmed. I mean, what we're talking about here is so crazy. It's so different than what a killer whale can do, an elephant can do. No one reports in the bush that an elephant told them to throw their spear or their gun away. And yet, this is the stuff that Bigfooters say time and time again. Specific language being spoken to them that other people can't hear, especially people with weapons or people that seem to be an imposing force with a mission at stake, let's say. That's been my experience in looking into this. The only people that weren't targeted in our case were the people that didn't have weapons and didn't really come there to try to prove anything.
One last follow-up before I kick it back over to Daniel for his next question. Where is this area? Because this is something that's come up recently. When I first got into Bigfoot, really back into the subject, 5-6 years ago, and started really digging into encounters, I was under the impression that these things were primarily in the Pacific Northwest, and you had to be 18 miles deep in the woods to have an experience with these things. And boy, have I learned a lot over the last 3 to 4 years. They're happening, these experiences and these encounters seem to be happening on what I call edges. In some cases, in residential areas that back up to farmland or even some sort of forested areas. But it's not a place that you would expect to have a Bigfoot encounter, is what I'm saying. Where is this place, as far as the Owl Moon Lab, located? Is it very remote, or is it on one of these sort of areas that I call these edges that we've cut into as people were going further and further into the woods? Is it in one of those areas, or would you expect to have a Bigfoot type encounter there?
Edges with power lines and dishes. That's what I've noticed. Do you know what I mean by that? Like if you find an area, and this gets into the world of power spots and geomancing, and we're leaning on some of the work that Travis Taylor is doing at Skinwalker Ranch. But if you have a valley, a V-shaped valley, and you have a river, generally rivers love to run through valleys, and you have a quartz-rich environment underneath running water, you seem to have conductive energy for the supernatural, paranormal, hot spots or spots of the fawn. this was the Kalapuya territory at one time that we're speaking of. They called Sasquatch Chichu Chippy. And there's some interesting Western pioneer links to Sasquatch too in the area. We don't have time to get into. Read the book. But when it comes to the edges, I like that. I like that phrase. It is the edges, because what we're talking about here, Brian, is we're talking about the edges of what my friend Tom Powell calls the edges of science. We're in new territory right now where we don't even know the right questions to ask as it pertains to the phenomena. We're getting there. We're still looking at what's going on. I'm trying to talk people into asking maybe who these individuals are instead of what they are, because there seems to be a personality profile here that is similar to us. They're curious. They seem to want to gift you and things that you have just recently spoken about on the property. We would talk about personal things, nondescript things, and we would get gifts with large footprints and handprints on the property. This is something that, the term habituator is the coined term that people use. I call these Sasquatch contactees because the implication is that something extraordinary is going on. So these contactees, including one of the gals just up the road, Autumn Williams' mother, Sally Shepard Walford, who wrote Valley of the Skookum, lived up here near the Ording River in Washington, and they would talk about getting these strange gifts at their house as well, disappearing tracks in the snow. And she was leaning on the wisdom of a Native American next door. So for me, that's what I did in the beginning, is I leaned on the wisdom of the Kalapuya Native Americans, who are very tight-lipped about the phenomena. And so I had to kind of sleuth this out myself. But to get back to the origins of your question here, I think I remember what your question was. It's somewhat of a mystery for some people how to look into this phenomena still. I think they still think it's game cams and game trails and anything but what I'm saying. However, privately, when you give these guys a beer and you sit with them till 2 a.m, that's when the real truth comes out. So what is a lie? Well, is it omission? Yeah, I think so. And there's a lot of omitted facts by apers in this community regarding this phenomena. That's why we had to make this movie, right? Flash of Beauty, Paranormal Bigfoot, a sequel to A Flash of Beauty, Bigfoot Revealed. And now we're into Voices in the Wilderness territory and Ron Moorhead's story coming full circle. I just left the Sierra camp 2 weeks ago. We were invited up there by one of the founding members of the camp, Tobe Johnson. And so he was the son of one of the original founders of the camp. And there's some very strange stuff going on at the Sierra camp that Ron talked about, but that's not the end of the story. So these founding members of, we'll call them the forefathers of Bigfoot research, that have told this flesh and blood story also have this other story that hasn't been told yet. So hold on to your hat.
Wow. Well, before I go into my question, I've spoken to Ron Moorhead a few times, and it's been amazing when I've spoken to him. He's such an interesting guy. So moving on to my question then. So when you're out in the field, and you're either, now I don't know if you've had an experience or encounter, or when you feel like something's around you, how do you feel when you're in the forest or in your field area? How do you feel?
Well, I feel good if I'm below 6,000 feet. It turns out that I succumb to altitude sickness. I found that out a couple of weeks ago. But in general, it's just, it's where I want to be. I like to hang a hammock so I can really take in the whole old growth Pacific Northwest vibe. I had a chance to hang a hammock at Sierra Camp and just sit there and wait for the phenomena to approach me. That to me just seems like an inevitable choice, right? Like you're in the woods, you want to experience it all full on. And so that's the way I am with this. I don't know a lot of people that like to do night hiking alone. I haven't had anything super scary, Bigfoot related happen to me. It's always people. People freak me out when I'm out in the woods. You never know what to expect. And I carry a pistol. You know, I'm not out there with a pan flute and a quartz crystal only. I have both. You know what I mean? I'm going to throw my crystal and my bullets at these psychos. And so I think Sasquatch knows that. I think they know your intention. And, you know, I've got family, I've got obligations. I'm not going to have something have the upper hand on me. And I've never had a moment with Sasquatch that was foreboding, you know, like what we talked about with infrasound. However, I think that's totally possible. I don't know what these things are. When I call them a land spirit, I hope it's a land spirit that's not out to, you know, dupe me or dupe you guys, drag you away from, you know, the truth of the matter. That's what bothers me about this whole phenomena here is the cloak and dagger stuff. We really have no, we have so many stories about who they say they are to people that are just full of crap. And I never say that. I call them a land spirit because you just can't put a nail, you can't put a finger on them. You can't nail them down. They seem to be of the spirit world because of this orb phenomena. That's what I started out to see, Daniel, was someone told me that eventually, a gal named Beth Heikkinen, she said, eventually you will see the lights in proximity to Bigfoot, and they will be related. And it'll take you a while to figure out that they're related, but eventually you'll find that. And I did. I had my tent moved 49 feet and stuck in a tree in the same area. I saw, you know, about a 50-foot diameter light explode 3 or 4 different times in the woods in front of me. And it was all Bigfoot centric, scat, bipedal movement that I couldn't see in the daylight, witness reports on private property. I could lock it down. I could study it. It became kind of my first Al Moon lab, a place I called Oz up the McKenzie Valley. That's a whole long story. So yeah, I've seen something that I can only describe as Sasquatch from about the knees down behind my Jeep, about 4 a.m, 30 feet away on a moonless night, sneaking up to me. I haven't had the full-on PG shot, but who has? What I saw was enough to get me, you know, saying, okay, this is happening.
I want to get into a couple of things. I want to talk a little bit about going back to the book. I want to talk a little bit about you mentioned it earlier, the habituation situations where these people are seemingly habituating these creatures and or having multiple experiences. Again, when I first got into this and started going back and talking to people, I was one of those people that said, man, you just can't have multiple experiences with these things. It just becomes a little fuzzy at that point. It gets a little out there for me if you've had 4, 5, 6 experiences. And then you throw in some of the weird stuff with the lights and some people seeing craft and in some cases even what they consider to be alien craft and or beings in conjunction with Bigfoot. So there's a whole lot going on in these situations. And I used to sort of separate that and say, I'm not so sure you're having all these experiences. But as it turns out, the more I've talked to people, it seems that's happening more and more. Even to me, I've had multiple experiences with multiple different types of phenomenon over the years. And now I'm one of those persons who's had Bigfoot experiences and UFO experiences and poltergeist and ghost experiences. So let's talk a couple of things. First and foremost, you talk about in your book extended experiences of Sasquatch, which you call EESIs. I want to talk a little bit about that. And I think it sort of ties into what I was just talking about, but a little bit about the Taylor effect that you talk about in your book. Can you talk about those things and how you deal with that as an investigator with people who've had multiple experiences and maybe even be in a habituation situation?
Yeah, so it was a mouthful. EESIs. I did, you know, retitled the idea of extended experiencers as Sasquatch contactees in the book, just because it seems so alien connected. It's alien like, right? Like we're trying to understand what this alien connection is through ATIP and Arrow and the Pentagon right now. One thing's for sure is that they're preparing us for something. I mean, you have Lou Elizondo writing a book called Imminent, basically the head of this super secret Pentagon program looking into UFOs, saying things like maybe the phenomena comes between the spaces in between, not outer space, interdimensional, right? This is what he's saying. He's trying to soft disclosure the public here about something. Now, this gets into a whole new territory of what the government's been looking at all along. If you look into Skinwalker Ranch, you'll see that they've been looking into Bigfoot, but not calling it Bigfoot. They call it a humanoid walking out of portals. They describe seeing large biped humanoids all around the Uinta Basin, including Blind Frog Ranch, all along again, a basin, right? And gets into this parabolic dish-shaped idea. And maybe that's, spurred on by a meteor or something like that, leaving a discharge of some kind. This is what Travis Taylor's talking about. But as far as the Taylor effect, the definition, in my opinion, of that is that a little bit different than the hitchhiker effect, where the phenomena follows you home. And I'd be curious to know some of your stories in particular, Brian, about what's followed you home, because it follows us all home. But when you get into the Taylor effect, these are things that are nuanced for individuals. And it's almost maddening because that it's super unusual and unique, i.e. these gifts left in inexplicable spots with hair, with large handprints. It just seems Bigfooty, right? But it's so bonkers, and it's only for you, that it's tailor-made like a suit. You can't change it out with anybody. You can't, have your neighbor hear about this, your spouse, your kids. It's just like, I found an eagle feather in my locked car sitting on top of the steering wheel, and I was just, talking about how beautiful the eagles were. Something to that effect. Like, is that Bigfoot? Well, there's no evidence, but it's definitely Bigfooty. But these are the 2 a.m. conversations. See, the conferences are over, and then the bars open, and that's where the real stories are. The pub in your case there. I don't know if you're you guys can start having Guinness as soon as you get out of preschool, I think. But when the pub is open and the conferences are closed, and you too, Chris, maybe you can attest this, we can all raise a pint to the truth. And I think that's where you're going to find the truth, is at the pub.
I have definitely had those experiences at multiple conferences in the past. It all happens after the conference is over. I'm going to go to Chris and let Chris squeak in a question here.
I have a observation for those people on this side of the pond about your knee print, where you estimated 1,400 pounds. That's 635 kilograms. We got cars lighter than that. And as a 105 kilograms myself, I'm a little bit in awe of that. When this guy gets knees achy, like at my age, I feel for him, man. I think, Nick, if I go gifted, I'm going to leave paracetamol or ibuprofen or something like that. Yeah.
Well, and that wouldn't put it out of the possibility for a very unusual ungulate or elk, or there's roaming cattle in around that area. We found out later. However, there was no other disturbance, and there was mud from the same substrate 14 feet up in a tree. And so whatever it was seemed to be related to the weight displacement of 1,400 pounds done by Boeing engineer Scott Taylor. And Cindy Dosens, who studied the hair, to say, when you find knee impressions, they might be inbound to something elevated. Go look in a nearby tree. Is there a tree? And I said, well, there was a tree above those knee impressions. We'll go back and look. And we ended up finding this really distinct red clay. The knees were left in the bark of the tree, with a single hair coming out of the mud. Now, unfortunately, it was windy and we didn't get the hair in time coming out of the mud. I don't even think it was on camera, but we got so much on camera. And that's, the cool thing about the book is really the barcodes, and it takes you to the field evidence, all the audio, 1,400 hours worth of audio we collected from this area. Now, you're not going to listen to all 1,400 hours of clicks, taps, and stuff, but there are sounds in there, including language. These beings speak. They use what are called morphine streams and cognates in order to have utterances and conversations. And they do so in my research, only when they're with another. So never really alone. They're always, when they're speaking, there's more than one. And so you can hear a back and forth exchange, at least on, I believe, 2 of the sound clips from the property. And by the way, all the rural area this was, people were talking about Bigfoot. It wasn't just us. We had the farmers next door talking about a blue-eyed bear on 2 legs coming down to the farmhouse, leaving weird toys in front of their step. A gal in a yurt getting pine cones thrown at her. A cat that was smashed and delivered to the back door of a farmer's house on an elevated deck. Really strange stuff.
You mentioned a flash of beauty earlier, Bigfoot Revealed. There was one thing that I found very well. There's a lot of things that were intriguing about that documentary, but one thing in particular that you were involved in was a scene where you guys were out looking at some tree structures. Those things have always been something that has fascinated me when it comes to Bigfoot, because they're found almost everywhere. We found weird things over in the United Kingdom when we went out to Daniel's research area when we were there a couple of months ago. I found them here on my property in North Carolina. I found them in the Pacific Northwest. They're everywhere. It's a common thing when it comes to Bigfoot, or it seems to be. I went out on an expedition with Todd Standing last year in October. I was up there for a week. One of the most interesting things, outside of the thousands, literally thousands of tree breaks that are in and around that area, that appear to be something other than natural. I'll say that. We found this amazing tree, what I consider to be a tree structure. There was probably a 330-year-old tree. And there were these huge trees that were probably 80 feet long, maybe 12 to 14 inches in diameter. And there were 3 of them that came together at a point perfectly within inches of each other at the apex of these 3 trees. We did some quick analysis, found that there was no root ball. Todd actually went back later on and did some reconnaissance with the next group of folks that came in after I left, and found for sure they dug down. There was no root ball to these trees. They were placed there. The interesting thing that is sort of a correlation that I want to tie into the episode or the documentary, The Flash of Beauty, is you pulled out a compass and this thing was exactly due north. These multiple things were stacked up pointing exactly due north. And that is the correlation that we found in Canada with this particular tree. There was one exactly due north. The other one was exactly due south. The third one was a little bit off. It didn't make a whole lot of sense, but just to be able to place something within an inch or so, 80 feet tall in this huge tree, and it be exactly due north cannot be a coincidence in my opinion. And you'd have to have heavy equipment out there with all the deadfall that was around this tree. So long-winded question, but here it is. How are you finding, or how are you handling that in your research as far as these tree structures? I know it's obviously subjective, but what is your theory, if you have one, on is it Bigfoot related? Are they doing these things? And if so, why? And what is the possible reason behind these things? Because that's really the burning question for me.
Mm-hmm. Gosh. No one's really documented Sasquatch building these things. There seems to be trace evidence of eDNA around nesting sites. The Olympic Project has a whole nesting site out here in the OP. Nests are obviously a little different than what we're talking about here, especially with compasses. Although I'd be curious to see if there's some kind of anomaly associated with compasses in general. There's strange things that happen electronically with the phenomena, much like looking into poltergeists and stuff here. But let's just back up here. Maybe it's something simple to a direction of due north due to the fact that there's a travel area that they're suggesting another due. Maybe in this case, when we're in the documentary, there was a creek right down the way with a waterfall pointed in that area. So the reason I put my compass on that reported tree structure was to see if there's any kind of artifact that would happen to the compasses, though maybe it would spin in circles or something like that. Maybe it was, as I mentioned, an expedition Bigfoot, maybe it was geomance to create some kind of power spot or something like that. I don't think that's necessarily the case. These things are weird, and they're not only brute force strength types of things that make them weird, although snow load can do a lot of this. The forest is just a damned place where stuff falls all over and it makes no sense at times. But when you see whole root balls carried to different locations or laid in front of an old logging road, that's a brute force kind of thing happening there. I'm more interested in like the nuanced stuff, like the little tiny stuff that they seem to do. Really minute weavings to vine maple that continue to happen in the Cottage Grove area and up here. Vine maple seems to be the plant of choice. And we're talking about taking little branches and doing like Native American braid style stuff all the way up the vine and on and on and on. And these are living trees that are brought together to work on these things. Small, low areas to high up areas as well. And that just points to a type of almost like autistic nature of what we're looking into here. The very specific details into what we're looking at, to the degree where the average person wouldn't spend the time doing that.
Go ahead, Daniel.
Sorry, my mic was on mute and I could not get it to work. Before I ask this question, I've got to say this has been an incredible podcast. It's been amazing hearing about all your adventures, Tobe. So my last question. So within the Bigfoot world, there's always two different camps to what people think, sometimes more. But the main two are paranormal and the flesh and blood. Now, I'm pretty sure I know this answer, but maybe some people out there won't. So, could you tell us, number one, which one you fall in and why?
Yeah. Well, I was pushed down the rabbit hole of the paranormal as a young kid. And I never crawled out, it's just, maybe it's the fact that I was the only child. I don't know. But for me, it just seemed a whole lot more fun. And if you're not having fun doing this, you should just get out, because you're never going to really make anything off of it. It's all about friendships, I mean, my girlfriend I met at a Bigfoot conference, right? So obviously I scored big time. That's the first thing, fellas. You need to make sure that your lady's into this, because let's face it, we're male dominated category here. So if you're into cryptids, find a cryptid huntress. So that's my first key. But yeah, I mean, this is a weird topic. I'm just saying it's a little more weird than maybe the public. Ronnie, to his credit, and RPG to their credit, and even Bobo and the Finding Bigfoot days to his credit. These were all the people leaning on, well, there was that one story, or there is this cross-contamination issue of what's going on with the paranormal. But now we're in the mainstream, Daniel, to where this phenomena is being talked about with the X-Files music in the background. And we need to prepare ourselves, because there are people that have been really damaged by ridicule, ruined by ridicule, for seeing what they saw, not just Bigfoot, for the fact that they've seen the supernatural present itself with this phenomena. And we talk about that in our documentary as well, this idea of what's called a hidden event, and how you compartmentalize this type of trauma in your life, because it is a type of rewiring and trauma to your worldview that can really hose up your everyday reality.
Definitely true. Before we get out of here, we've mentioned it a couple of times. We've talked about the book. We've talked about some of your television stuff. Tell everybody where they can get the book, where's the best place to pick that up, what they can expect when they get it, and talk about any other projects that you're working on or you have coming up, Tobe.
Well, you can check out the book on Hangar One Publishing or Amazon, The Almoon Lab, A Paranormal Experiment. I would send everybody over to our YouTube channel over at A Flash of Beauty, the podcast, where we do weekly live shows as well, with Jill Remensnyder, the producer, and Brett Eichenberger, the director of A Flash of Beauty. We're under pre-production, wrapping up Voices in the Wilderness. the whole story about what happened in the Sierras. It's going to blow people away. A piece of the American Northwest, a Western story, really, of a supernatural kind. And of course, you can go check out all our free stuff over at the YouTube channel, including A Flash of Beauty, Bigfoot Revealed, and Paranormal Bigfoot, and a lot of interviews. We have a lot of behind the scene interviews that get into this witness testimony, and people are really responding to them.
Awesome. Chris, any last words from you, sir, before we get out of here?
I spent some time as a truck driver on your side of the water, so hats off to you.
10-4, good buddy.
Yeah, you know it. I used to volunteer for the long haul through the forest across from Toronto to Calgary, and used to drive from Calgary down into the States, across the country, and then back across. And I kept volunteering for it in the hope people thought I was crazy, but yeah.
Nice.
And Daniel, of course, as always, sir, you get the last word when we are together, my friend. Make sure you unmute yourself.
Do you want me to say the very last words?
You say whatever you want. It's all you. Everybody, all eyes are on you, my friend.
So I would like to say thank you to everyone in the chat. Whilst the podcast has been going on, I have been paying attention to it, and we have some great people in the chat, including the Alaska Bigfoot cruise. I take it leaves tomorrow, so good luck to you guys. And say, Tobe, it's been amazing. And say, we had a chat, I think it was 2 days ago now. And say, for those 2 days, it's been amazing knowing you, mate. And I hope we can continue working together at some point, possibly another podcast. I will just put it out there.
Absolutely.
So, guys, I will. My last words will be: keep searching, stay mythical, and stay safe out there.
Peace, y'all.
They say you don't gotta go home, but you can't.